For years, my husband's family made it their mission to break me, to humiliate me, to prove that a girl who sold tacos from a food truck was never going to be good enough for their culinary dynasty. They weaponized their money, their reputation, and their cold, calculated cruelty. But what they didn't know was that while they were busy trying to destroy me, I was learning a secret ingredient they couldn't even taste. The bitter truth about their perfect family, and that truth, it was going to be my perfect revenge story. If you've ever felt like an outsider in your own family, like your worth was measured by someone else's approval, hit that subscribe button right now. Your support fuels more stories of real people fighting back against injustice. Now, let's get into it. I'll never forget the day my perfect world came to a screeching halt. The air in my food truck, the firefly, was thick with the scent of simmering pork shoulder and sizzling onions. It was a perfect Tuesday morning, and the line of regulars stretched down the block. I was smiling, wiping a smudge of flour from my cheek, when my phone buzzed. It was Leo, my husband. "Hey, babe. You sound busy," he said, his voice unusually tense. "Yeah, it's a great day," I chirped, my heart swelling with that familiar joy. My food truck wasn't just a business. It was my sanctuary. "What's up? You sound weird." A long pause hung in the air, broken only by the happy chatter of my customers and the gentle clatter of my kitchen tools. "My dad. He wants us to come over tonight," Leo finally said, his tone flat. "He says it's important, a family matter." My stomach tightened into a hard knot. My in-laws, the infamous Sterling family, never just had a talk. Their conversations were meticulously orchestrated performances designed to remind me of my place. They were a culinary dynasty, famous for their minimalist, high-end restaurants and their unforgiving standards. My husband, Leo, was their golden boy, the next heir to their gastronomic throne. And me, I was just Lena, the girl who sold street tacos. I tried to shake off the unease. Maybe after 5 years of marriage, they were finally ready to accept me. Or at least, stop pretending I didn't exist. Maybe they wanted to discuss the new restaurant Leo and I were planning to open together. "Okay," I said, forcing a cheerful tone. "I'll close up early. What should I wear?" "Doesn't matter," he mumbled, his voice colder now. Just be yourself, I guess." The line went dead. The silence was more jarring than anything he could have said. It felt like a warning shot. He didn't sound like my husband anymore. He sounded like a soldier, about to walk into enemy territory. And for some reason, I had a sinking feeling I was the enemy. By the time I pulled up to the Sterling Manor, a majestic Victorian house that looked more like a museum than a home, my hands were shaking. I walked in, and the sterile silence of the kitchen felt like a physical weight on my shoulders. It was a stillness that was about to be broken by a storm I didn't see coming. I had no idea that my entire life was about to be served to me on a poisoned silver platter. To understand why that moment felt so heavy, with my hand hovering over the doorknob, you have to go back to the day I met Leo. It wasn't in some fancy restaurant or at a charity gala. It was right here, on this street, outside the Firefly. He came to my truck on a sweltering July day. He wore a crisp white polo and looked completely out of place, but he wasn't a tourist. He was a regular at the high-end places his family owned. He ordered my spicy pork tacos, the ones my abuela taught me how to make, and took a bite. His eyes widened. He stood there for a full minute, silent, chewing with this look of pure astonishment. I figured he was about to complain, But when he finished, he just said, "That's real food." And just like that, our story began. He was drawn to the authenticity, the soul in my cooking. It was a stark contrast to the sterile molecular gastronomy he grew up with. He loved my food, and more importantly, he seemed to love me for what I was. But meeting his family, that was a different story. Chef Sterling, Leo's father, was a titan in the culinary world, a man whose name was a brand. His handshake was firm, but his eyes were cold and assessing, like a food critic evaluating a dish he already knew he would hate. He looked at me and smiled a brittle smile that never reached his eyes. "So, you run a food truck. How quaint. A charming little hobby." It wasn't an insult. Not on the surface, but every word was a calculated jab, a reminder that my honest work was just a passing phase, a cute eccentricity before I settled into my real role being Leo's wife. Then there was Charlotte, Leo's sister, the golden child. She had a master's degree in food science from Paris and managed their flagship restaurant. She was all sharp angles and polite condescension. "It's sweet that you get so much joy from simple food," she said once, peering into my kitchen with a look of polite disgust. But a real chef understands structure, purity, not grease and spice. My food wasn't just my career. It was a part of my heritage, my abuela's legacy. But to them, it was just common. My passion was a dirty word in their pristine, marble-tiled world. My life with Leo became a constant balancing act. At their family dinners, I was a ghost. They'd talk about supplier chains, Michelin stars, and investment portfolios, and when I tried to contribute mentioning my own growing customer base or a new recipe, I was met with blank stares. Leo would just squeeze my hand under the table, a silent apology. His love was genuine, but his backbone was, well, it was still being molded by his father. I started to feel small. I'd find myself apologizing for the smell of fried onions on my hands or the dirt on my boots. I'd try to cook their food, making perfect reductions and flawless soufflés, but my hands felt clumsy. The joy was gone. It felt less like cooking and more like an audition I was constantly failing. Does this sound familiar? Have you ever felt like you had to shrink yourself just to make someone else comfortable, like your entire identity was being chipped away, piece by piece, by people who were supposed to love you? Drop a comment below and tell me if you've been there. I'm here to listen. I thought if I just worked harder, if I just loved Leo enough, they would finally see my worth. I sacrificed my own dreams, put my business on the back burner to help with Leo's family's new restaurant expansion. I did their books, managed their social media, even ran errands. I bent over backward, all to prove that I was more than just a girl in a food truck. I was family, but as I stood at their front door that night, I had a sinking feeling that no amount of sacrifice would ever be enough. I closed the Firefly with a heavy heart. That little truck was more than just a business. It was my dream, my legacy, Abuela's recipes, the friendly faces of my regulars, the smell of fresh cilantro and slow-roasted meat. It was my identity. But Leo's father, Chef Sterling, made it clear that my little hobby wouldn't cut it. To be a Sterling, you had to be part of the legacy. So I sold the truck, locked up my dream, and walked into their world. My days, once filled with the rhythmic joy of chopping vegetables and serving up happiness, became a sterile blur. I traded my chef's coat for business casual and my kitchen for a desk in the back office of their flagship restaurant. My new job managing their supply chain. It was a labyrinth of spreadsheets and corporate lingo. My hands, which used to be dusted with flour, now ached from typing and mouse clicks. I thought if I worked twice as hard, they would finally see me, that my sacrifice would be my ticket in. I stayed late, streamlined their inventory, and even saved them thousands by finding new, cheaper suppliers. I'd walk through the pristine kitchen, watching Leo and Charlotte in their crisp chef whites, their hands moving with confident precision. I'd see the look of pride on Chef Sterling's face when he watched Charlotte plate a dish, and I'd feel this hollow ache in my chest. At family dinners, which were less about family and more about performance, I'd try to contribute. I remember one night, I had just finished saving them a fortune by renegotiating a contract for their premium scallops. I was so proud. I met with the supplier today, I said, a little too eagerly. They were really impressed with our business plan. Chef Sterling simply raised an eyebrow. That's what Leo pays people to do. Lena, it's part of the machinery. Nothing to be impressed by. The words hit me like a physical blow. He didn't see my contribution as a sacrifice or a labor of love. He saw it as a task he had hired me to do, no different than a plumber fixing a leak. It wasn't my talent. It was a transaction. I started to internalize it. My inner monologue became a constant stream of self-doubt. Am I losing myself? What if my cooking really was just a hobby? What if I was never meant for this world, or any world outside of my food truck? My passion, which had once been my biggest strength, now felt like a deep, embarrassing weakness. It was a secret I had to keep hidden, a part of myself I was slowly burying to become the woman they wanted me to be. Have you ever had to give up something you love to please someone else, only to realize that no matter what you did, it would never be enough? It's a gut-wrenching feeling, a slow burning burn of betrayal that you can't even put into words. One night, while working late, I was looking over the supply records. My eyes fell on a line item that just didn't make sense. A large sum of money being funneled to a third-party distributor. It was an off-the-books transaction that seemed suspicious. I brushed it off at first. It must be some sort of internal accounting. A company like the Sterlings would never do anything unethical. Their entire brand was built on purity and integrity. But the more I looked, the more a knot formed in my stomach. The figures were too specific. The dates, too consistent. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. This wasn't a mistake. This was a secret. A dirty little secret hidden beneath the flawless, gleaming surface of the Sterling brand. A secret that would make all their talk of purity and excellence sound like the most elaborate lie. And I, the girl who was only good for a hobby, had stumbled right into the middle of it. I'll never forget the silence that night. The kind of silence you can only find in a room of 100 perfectly dressed people, all staring at a single, broken thing. The Sterling Manor felt more like a fortress than a home. Tonight, it was a museum for their ego, a stark contrast to the living, breathing chaos of my food truck kitchen. I had put on the most expensive dress I owned, a simple navy blue silk that felt elegant but understated. Leo had said, "Just be yourself." But I knew that was a lie. My natural self was a woman with flour-dusted hands and a big heart. Tonight, they wanted a Sterling accessory, a quiet, polished symbol of Leo's refined taste. The air was thick with the scent of white truffle and polished wood. Bartenders in crisp black vests moved silently, serving tiny, intricate canapes that looked more like modern art than food. Everyone was a somebody in the culinary world. Award-winning critics, renowned chefs, powerful restaurant investors. I felt 100 sets of eyes on me, each one a silent judgment. My food truck felt 1,000,000 miles away. Leo was in his element. He moved through the crowd with the effortless grace of a man who was born for this. He was charming, he was brilliant, and for a few moments, he was mine. He introduced me to a few people, but his introductions were always the same. This is my wife, Lena. She's my inspiration. She has this little food truck business. The word little was a tiny needle, pricking my self-worth every time he said it. I'd smile, but inside, I felt like a museum exhibit. My mind kept going back to that ledger, those suspicious transactions, the paper trail that led to a shell company. I tried to talk to Leo about it in the car, but he just brushed it off. Corporate stuff. Babe, my dad handles it. You don't need to worry about the numbers. He had looked at me with this dismissive pity that made my skin crawl. He thought I was just a simple girl who couldn't understand complex business. And for a moment, I almost believed him. Charlotte, in her sleek, black gown, was a vision of perfection. She was the one to watch, the one the critics gathered around. Her new dessert menu was the talk of the town, all liquid nitrogen and edible flowers. She gave me a tight, saccharine smile. You must be so excited for Leo. This expansion is going to be amazing. So much bigger than, well, you know. Her eyes flicked toward my dress, and then back to the plate of tiny, jewel-like pastries she was holding. I knew exactly what she meant. Bigger than me. Then, the moment came. Chef Sterling, a man whose presence could command an entire room, took the stage. He was a master of performance, a showman. He spoke about legacy, about family, and about the purity of a culinary vision that had been passed down for generations. His voice was a velvet blanket, covering a razor-sharp blade. Tonight, he announced, his voice booming through the silent room. We are celebrating not just an expansion, but a continuation, a legacy that my son, Leo, is prepared to carry forward. This new restaurant will be a monument to everything our name stands for: purity, tradition, excellence. He motioned for Leo to come up. Leo ascended the steps, a proud smile on his face. The crowd applauded. This was his moment. But of course, Chef Sterling continued, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me. A cruel little smile played on his lips. I must also mention my daughter-in-law, Lena. For 5 years, she has been a source of fascination for us all. She reminds us all of where we began, in simple, humble roots. A charming little hobbyist with her food truck. And while it has been a sweet diversion, we must always remember that a hobby is just that. It's not a business, and it's certainly not a legacy. My blood ran cold. My heart pounded against my ribs. I felt 100 pairs of eyes turn to me. They weren't just judging me anymore. They were pitying me. I wanted to disappear. The heat of humiliation burned my cheeks, and I felt the tears welling up in my eyes. I looked at Leo, begging him with my eyes to say something, to defend me, to tell his father that my work was not a hobby, that it was honest, that it was real. But he didn't. He looked at me, not with love, but with embarrassment. The shame on his face wasn't for his father's words. It was for me, for my very existence. He looked away, and in that moment, my heart shattered. I felt like I was standing naked in the center of the room, exposed, humiliated. That's what it felt like to be publicly embarrassed by someone you love. It's a pain that goes deeper than any insult. It's a wound that feels like it will never heal. It's a betrayal that can't be undone. Have you ever felt that kind of pain? The kind where you're just a pawn in someone else's game, where the person who is supposed to love and protect you stands by and watches you get torn down? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. I backed away from the stage, a ghost in my navy blue dress. As the crowd erupted in applause for Leo and his father, I felt a new emotion rise in my chest. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't despair. It was a cold, hard, furious clarity. Their legacy was a lie. I had seen the proof in their ledgers, and my pain, my humiliation. It wasn't just a byproduct of their cruelty. It was a weapon. I had the bitter truth, and I was going to use it. This moment, the one everyone says defines you, is a lie. It's the moment you get to choose who you are, a victim or a fighter. The awards gala was a spectacle of culinary genius and quiet ambition, a hall of mirrors where everyone saw what they wanted to see. The air was perfumed with expensive cologne and the heady scent of success. I was dressed in a sleek, elegant black jumpsuit, a far cry from my usual apron, but I felt naked, exposed under the glittering lights. I had arrived alone, my stomach in knots. I saw Leo across the room, his face a mask of practiced professionalism, surrounded by critics and colleagues. He looked at me for a moment, a flash of something unreadable in his eyes, before turning back to his conversation. He was a perfect son, a perfect heir, in a perfect world I no longer wanted to be a part of. The evening was a blur of polite conversation and fake smiles. I felt like an outsider looking in, watching a perfectly choreographed dance. I saw Chef Sterling holding court, his charisma a magnetic force. I saw Charlotte, his golden girl, being interviewed by a famous journalist. She looked a little too perfect, a little too flawless. And then, it was time. The announcer called Chef Sterling to the stage to receive his Lifetime Achievement Award. The room erupted in applause. As he accepted the award, he held it aloft like a trophy of his life's work. His voice, once again, a velvet curtain hiding the truth. He spoke about passion, about a legacy built on integrity and excellence. His words felt hollow and hypocritical. He then turned to the audience and his gaze locked onto me. A smile, slow and chilling, spread across his face. "Before I step down," he said, his voice carrying through the silent, expectant room, "there is one more matter to attend to. A lesson, if you will, on what it takes to build an empire. You must be willing to cut ties with anything that holds you back, anything that compromises your vision, even family." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew this was coming. He motioned for Leo to join him on stage. Leo looked at me once more, a flash of something that might have been regret, before he climbed the steps. He took his place next to his father, a soldier standing at attention. The crowd watched, captivated. "My son is a brilliant man," Chef Sterling continued, his arm around Leo's shoulder. "He is destined for greatness. But for that to happen, he must be unencumbered. He must be free to reach his full potential." He walked toward me, his movements slow and deliberate, and held out 2 large envelopes. "Lena," he said, his voice just loud enough for those around me to hear. "As a sign of our affection and respect, we've decided to make this easy for you." He gestured to the 2 envelopes. "This first one," he said, holding up a plain, white envelope, "is a formal notice of divorce. For Leo's sake, we've decided to dissolve this marriage. He needs a partner, not a project." The words hit me like a physical blow. The room gasped, a collective intake of breath. The cameras flashed. I could feel the heat of 100 eyes on me. This was it. The final public humiliation. "And this second one," he said, a triumphant smile on his face as he held up a manila envelope, "is a formal notice from our legal team. We have no choice but to sue you for slander and copyright infringement for using the Sterling name in your little venture." His words hung in the air, cold and calculated. I looked from the envelopes to Leo, who was staring blankly ahead. He was a coward. I looked at Charlotte, who was smiling, a cruel satisfaction in her eyes. This was all for their benefit, for their sick entertainment. They thought they had finally broken me, and for a split second, they were right. I felt the tears well up. The humiliation was a raw, burning pain. I wanted to run, to hide, to simply cease to exist. But then, my eyes landed on the manila envelope, the legal documents, and I saw my way out, the solution to everything. This wasn't a death sentence. It was a gift. They had just given me the ultimate platform. I took the envelopes from his hands, my own hand not shaking. I looked him in the eye, and in a voice that was calm and steady, I spoke. "Chef Sterling," I said, my voice echoing in the sudden silence. "You talk about integrity and legacy, but you and I both know that's a lie. It's built on a house of cards, a house of cheap, unethical, and potentially illegal suppliers." A murmur went through the crowd. Chef Sterling's face turned a shade of sickly gray. "What are you talking about?" he spat, his voice losing its composure. "I'm talking about the shell company you've been funneling money into," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "I'm talking about the supplier you've been using to cut corners, a supplier that's been exposed for labor violations and food safety issues." The crowd buzzed with a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. Charlotte's jaw dropped. Leo finally looked at me, a flash of pure panic in his eyes. This moment where the person you trusted most turns their back on you, that's the moment you find out who you really are. Have you ever been pushed to your absolute limit and found a strength you didn't know you had? Share your story in the comments below. I looked at the legal documents in my hand, and I realized what they truly were. They were my golden ticket. He had just given me a very public reason to expose every single one of their secrets. He had given me a platform to prove to the world that his legacy wasn't built on excellence. It was built on lies. With a final, triumphant smile, I looked Chef Sterling in the eye. "You wanted to teach me a lesson," I said. "You just gave me everything I need." I turned and walked out of the gala, leaving the Sterling family to face the fallout. It wasn't a retreat. It was my first real step toward victory. The moment I stepped out of that ballroom, the cool night air hit me like a slap to the face. The silence of the street was a stark contrast to the buzzing chaos I'd left behind. My name, Lena, was likely a whispered curse inside. A dozen flashing cameras were pointed at me as I walked, my jaw set, my hands shoved into the pockets of my jumpsuit. A reporter with a microphone was shouting my name. Lena. What was that about? What's going on? I didn't answer. I didn't even look at her. I just hailed a cab. The cab driver, a kind man with tired eyes, gave me a compassionate glance in the rearview mirror, but he didn't say a word. He just drove. And for the first time in what felt like a very, very long time, I was alone with my thoughts. The shock was gone, replaced by a cold, quiet calm. I wasn't just leaving a party, I was leaving a prison. The envelopes felt heavy in my purse, but not with dread, with power. The divorce papers were a gift, a key to a door I had been too afraid to open. The lawsuit, their final attempt at control, was a golden ticket. It gave me the perfect, public excuse to unleash the truth. My phone rang. Leo's name flashed on the screen. I silenced it and turned it off. I wasn't ready to talk to him. I needed to breathe. I needed to think. My mind was a steel trap, locking in every detail. The flash of panic on Chef Sterling's face, the horror in Charlotte's eyes, the way Leo had looked at me on stage, not with love or pity, but with pure, unadulterated fear. He was terrified, not for me, but for his family's perfect facade. My first call wasn't to a lawyer, it was to Maria, my friend, my confidant, my fellow food truck owner. She picked up on the first ring. "Lena." "What the hell just happened?" she said, her voice a mix of fury and concern. "My news feed is going nuts. Are you okay?" "I'm okay. Maria," I said, and the words felt like the most profound truth I had ever spoken. "I'm better than okay. They just tried to ruin me, and they gave me the platform to destroy them instead." I told her everything, the lawsuit, the divorce papers, the documents I had found. I spoke in a low, even voice, my anger a simmering thing just below the surface. Maria just listened. When I was done, she didn't offer pity. She offered a battle plan. I knew there was something off about them. She said, her voice hardening, that perfect facade was a lie. You get home, you get a good night's sleep, and tomorrow, we go to war. Her voice was a comfort, a lifeline. I felt a surge of gratitude. This was what real family looked like. Unconditional support, not conditional acceptance. I arrived home to a cold, silent house. Leo was already there. He was pacing in the living room, his face pale, his perfect hair disheveled. He was a man unraveling. He didn't look like the golden boy anymore. He looked small. He looked at me, and his eyes, for the first time in years, were filled with a genuine emotion, raw, naked fear. "What did you do?" "Lena," he spat, his voice shaking. "You just threw everything away. You ruined my father's ceremony. You ruined my career." I closed the door behind me and dropped my purse on the floor. The weight of his accusations was nothing compared to the weight of his betrayal. I didn't ruin anything. "Leo, you did." He flinched, as if I had slapped him. "Me, what are you talking about?" My dad said. He said this was for my own good. He said it was a necessary step. He said you would never understand our legacy. I walked past him, into the kitchen, and got a glass of water. My hands were steady. "I understand your legacy perfectly," I said, taking a sip. "I understand that it's built on a foundation of cheap labor and shady suppliers. I understand that the food you all pretend to be so pure is a lie." He followed me, his face a mix of fury and disbelief. "My dad would never do that. You don't know what you're talking about." "Lena, you're just angry. You're lashing out because you're a failure. You're just a hobbyist." The words that once made me feel so small now felt like dust. I was a hobbyist. Leo, because you all made me one. I closed my business to help you. I gave up my dream for you. I spent 5 years of my life trying to be something I was not, just to be accepted by your family. I did everything you asked, and you still stood there and watched them destroy me. My voice was quiet, but it was a quiet that commanded attention. You didn't just stand there, Leo. You signed your name on the divorce papers. You let your dad sue me. You were their accomplice. You were supposed to be my partner, my husband. But you were just another Sterling. His face crumpled. He looked like a little boy whose secret had been found out. He tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away. Lena, please, he whispered, his voice thick with what I now knew was not love, but guilt. Please, we can fix this. I'll talk to my dad. I'll make him drop the lawsuit. We can try again. My eyes went cold. No, Leo, I said. There is no we. You chose your family. You chose their lies over my truth. You chose their approval over my happiness. You chose a reputation that isn't even real, and I'm done being the pawn in your twisted game. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I could see the dawning realization. He hadn't just lost his wife. He had lost his alibi. He had lost the one person who could have saved him from a life of living his father's lie. This moment where you find the courage to stand up to the people who've held you down, that's true freedom. It's not about revenge. It's about taking back your power. Have you ever had to stand up to your family and say, enough is enough? What gave you the strength to do it? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. I took the divorce papers from my purse, looked at them one last time, and slid them across the table to him. Then I grabbed a single suitcase from the closet, the one I had packed when I first thought I was moving into a new life. And I walked out the door. My car started with a soft purr, and as I drove away from the Sterling Manor, I didn't look back. The bitter taste of my own truth was finally mine alone. The drive was a silent blur of streetlights and passing cars. I felt an incredible sense of lightness, as if a lifetime of pretense had been physically peeled away. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was free. I turned my phone back on, but instead of the stream of frantic messages I expected, I saw only one from Maria. My door's open. The couch is yours. I didn't need to be told twice. I drove straight to her apartment, walked in, and for the first time in what felt like a very, very long time, I took a full, deep breath. The air in her tiny living room smelled like garlic and coffee, not the sterile cleanliness of the Sterling's mansion. We didn't talk about what happened. Not yet. She just handed me a glass of wine and let me be, and in that quiet space, I felt the first glimmer of healing. I was not a victim. I was a survivor. The morning after, the phone calls started. Not from Leo or his family. They were too busy. The first call was from a journalist who had been at the gala. Ms. Sterling, she said, her voice laced with professional urgency. I want to hear your side of the story. I hear you have documents that could put a serious dent in the Sterling name. I'm ready to run a piece. My hands trembled, but this time not with fear, with purpose. The chaos I had caused was no longer a burden, it was my platform. This was my moment to take control of the narrative. I told her I would give her everything. The full story, the dirty laundry, all the hypocrisy, and just like that, the first domino fell. The fallout was swift and brutal. The article hit the digital world like a shockwave, detailing the Sterling's fraudulent supply chain and the hypocrisy of their legacy. Other publications picked up the story. Social media exploded. Chef Sterling's perfectly crafted reputation crumbled. their restaurants, once symbols of perfection, were now monuments to a lie. The public, who had once adored their brand, turned against them. I watched from a distance, a quiet spectator to the downfall of the dynasty. I didn't feel a sense of glee or vengeance, just a cold, hard sense of justice. They weren't just a family anymore. They were a company, and their brand was now worthless. The lawsuit, once a threat, became a joke. A judge threw it out, citing their public admission of fraud as evidence that my claims were not baseless. The divorce was finalized quickly. There was no fight. There was nothing left to fight for. I signed the papers, and the name Sterling officially became a memory. The real work began now. It was no longer about revenge. It was about rebuilding. I had a clear vision. I was going to build a brand based on everything the Sterlings had rejected: honesty, authenticity, and heart. I named my company the Golden Ticket, a nod to the opportunity they had unknowingly handed me. I rented a small, industrial kitchen space. It smelled of fresh concrete and possibility. I hired 2 people, a young, ambitious intern named Alex and an experienced business manager named Grace. I told them my story, all of it. They didn't see a woman who had been humiliated. They saw a woman with a mission. My first product was a line of bottled sauces based on the very recipes the Sterlings had scoffed at, the ones my abuela taught me, the ones they had called simple. The labeling was bright and bold, a direct contrast to their elegant, understated brand. My motto was simple: real food, real story. My brand was a celebration of imperfection, of passion, and of the things that truly matter. It was a brand built on my truth. The success was incredible. The story of my public showdown with the Sterling dynasty had gone viral. People were hungry for a real story, for a brand they could believe in. They bought my sauces not just because they were delicious, but because they felt a connection to my journey. Have you ever found that your biggest struggle became your greatest strength? Tell me about your golden ticket moment in the comments. I read every one of them. My first major business deal was a full circle moment. A major grocery chain wanted to distribute my sauces nationwide. The same company Leo's family had been trying to partner with for years. I sat at a conference table, the contract in front of me, wearing a simple white blouse and a smile that reached my eyes. I was no longer a ghost in a boardroom. I was the reason the room existed. I ran into Leo a few months later. It was at a farmer's market I was visiting for a new product. He looked different. The perfect poise was gone. He looked tired, older. He was carrying a bag of groceries, and he saw me. He walked towards me, his eyes full of 100 unspoken words. "Lena," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You look good." I smiled. A real smile. "I am." He looked at me, then at the bustling market, and finally at a small group of people gathered around my table of sauces. "I'm sorry," he said. The words felt hollow, like an apology he had rehearsed 1,000 times. For everything. My dad. He's a difficult man. He ruined everything. My smile didn't falter, but it hardened. He didn't ruin anything. Leo. He gave me everything. He gave me my freedom. And he showed me that your family's perfect legacy was just a lie, a very expensive, very tasteless lie. He flinched, and I knew the truth of my words had hit home. There was nothing left to say. There was nothing left to do. I was not there to forgive him. I was there to live my life. I gave him one final nod, turned, and walked away. I didn't look back. The story ends here, but my life, my life was just beginning. I'm standing here today, a year after that fateful night, with a message for anyone who has ever been made to feel small. Your value is not determined by a title or a bank account. It's determined by your authenticity, by your courage, by your truth. Your struggle is not a sign of weakness. It's a secret ingredient. It's the bitter truth that will one day become your golden ticket. If this story resonated with you, and you want to see more real-life revenge stories, powerful comebacks, and honest advice about turning your pain into power, then smash that subscribe button. Join this community of survivors and fighters. We're here to remind you that your story matters, that your voice deserves to be heard, and that no matter what life throws at you, you have the power to cook up your own brand of perfect. Drop a comment below and tell me, what does your golden ticket look like?